James, what does monastery mean? Like, let's just start there before we even jump
Before we
into the
even
book.
introduce ourselves or
Before we introduce ourselves, what does monastery mean?
So what is monastery? So I don't know about you guys' background, but I grew up in Protestant churches with rock and roll bands. So it's like, anything, yeah, monastery and even certain more liturgical things were always just kind of weird to me. But the word monastery used to mean monks to me, right? And which I always thought of people in seclusion and them alone with God. But the more I've actually studied and kind of understood what monasteries are, is it's uniquely about community. I mean, like these people are pursuing God, but the beauty of monasteries is they're pursuing God together. It's a collective thing, which I had the idea of, just a bunch of introverts in little stone boxes and just happy with their Bible. And it's actually monasteries are interactive and they work together, they disagree, they annoy each other, right? And it's like, wow, that's kind of like every family.
The reason we're doing this book discussion is you. So I thought, oh man, this would be great. And so I got breakfast with Pastor James and just talking about a variety of things. And he mentioned this book. And I was like, okay, step one, like Monica and I listened to it together. And it took us a surprisingly long time. It's only like 15 minutes on Audible, but I think it took us like 2 or 3 months to get through it. Um, and I was like, oh man, it would be fun to discuss this with you because you are so passionate about the
Mhm.
monastery and like church history and old things. And we need that.
Yeah. And in my experience, I mean, you guys have a little kids, and you're in that stage, and our kids are 20 and 23, and and parenting's hard, obviously, and there's all the stages and there's the things, and I think looking back, I spent so much of my parenting years kind of trying to survive and navigate different seasons, like like the diaper season was exhausting, and then you get to the next season and it's like, oh my gosh, this is so. And I think I spent a lot of energy trying to maintain my spiritual health and just my emotional health in the midst of it, and it was a battle. And I think when I read this book, I read it kind of late to help me, but the reality was, it was like, oh, maybe you're not supposed to fight it. Does it make sense? And maybe they actually work together for spiritual formation. And it was like, well, shoot. So yeah. So when we had breakfast, I was like, a little nugget.
Yeah. Well, hopefully, we can grow from it and whoever's gonna listen to this and you can get it like Hoopla, Libby, lots of
Yeah.
places to get a copy of this.
Yeah, before we dive into the details, I thought it was interesting. So many times you think about like Christian book parenting, and it's like how to be a better parent as a Christian. And I felt like this book kind of turned that whole thing on its head. It's like, how does being a parent make you a better Christian? And
Hmm.
how do you get to know God more? Rather than how can you use God to be there for your kids? And so I really liked the way that kind of turned the whole expectation of this kind of book on its head. So for anybody that's looking to read the book, it's not like 10 tips on how to be a better, homemaker or anything like that. It's like, how do your kids sanctify you by their very existence? And it's great. So
That's so good.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, and it makes me think about like when you fly, and they say if there's a loss of cabin pressure,
mhm.
put the mask on yourself. Like don't. And every parent is going to want to save their littles, but the reality is, it's like if we're not breathing oxygen, if we're not being filled, your kid's dead if you're not breathing and taking that in. And yeah, but what you said, that they're actually instruments of formation in your life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's radical. So thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Great. Well, let's take a moment and just briefly introduce ourselves. So I'm Jonathan Romig. This is our YouTube channel, and I do work. I work at a Christian nonprofit in Denver, and I served as a pastor for about a decade, and have like a doctor of ministry and an MDiv. And I'm a dad of, I don't know, 6 years, 6.5.
I thought you forgot how many kids we have.
Yes.
It's only three. We only have three kids.
6.5 years, 3.5 kids. No,
Just three kids.
just
No
three
news.
kids. No news. Breaking something on YouTube. Yeah, and they're 6.5, 4.5, and 7 months, and so like I can say like we're in the thick of it.
Yeah.
It's now what everyone likes to call zone defense.
Yes.
I don't really get sports, so it
Sports.
doesn't really make sense to me. But no, I get the concept. So, who are you?
I'm Monica Romig. I'm married to him. Those kids are my kids, and we met in seminary. I got my MDiv at Gordon Conwell with Jonathan, and I'm a high school Bible teacher currently. So, yeah, that's our life. Who are you, James?
Yeah, who are you?
Yeah, so my name is James Johnson. I'm a pastor at Crossroads Church, and my title is spiritual growth pastor. So really, I mean, just diving into the mystery of how do we grow into the image of Christ, and I mean, it's such a dynamic process, and with culture always changing around us, nobody's really cracked the code totally on what this looks like. But it's kind of my a little obsession. So it's fun to have conversations with people in the midst and help others in the process of figuring out how to encounter God more fully.
Beautiful.
That's great.
Well,
Yeah.
there's one other person that we should introduce. His name is Ronald, which is a great name, Ronald Rolheiser. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right.
He's not here to correct us, so.
He is not.
Yeah, see if he listens to this. But so this is just a brief bio on him. He's a Roman Catholic priest and a member of the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. He is a theologian, professor, award-winning author, and serves as the president of the Oblate School of Theology, a specialist in the fields of spirituality and systematic theology, and a New York Times best-selling author. Friar Ron writes a weekly column that is featured in more than 70 newspapers worldwide. He is the author of many books, including the bestseller The Holy Longing, and Sacred Fire, as well as The Restless Heart, Forgotten Amongst the Lilies, Bruised and Wounded, and Domestic Monastery. This is my first introduction to him as an author, so I have not read any of his other books or works, so it's fun to kind of hear from him.
Yeah. And he's a fantastic author. I found out about him probably 3.5 years ago. I was kind of binging a bunch of sermons by John Mark Comer, who's just a great teacher, and he would like drop various authors where he gets ideas, and every time John Mark Comer like mentions a book, I would like write it in my notes on my phone, and he kept bringing up Ronald Rolheiser, and I read The Holy Longing, Sacred Fire, Restless Heart, and kind of in the vein, if people are familiar with Henry Nouwen and Brennan Manning, I mean, kind of people who come from the Catholic stream, but there's such a sincere love for Jesus, and there's an obsession to kind of lean into the mystery of knowing God. So it's not super high liturgy. It's just that their background includes a lot of things like monasteries, like liturgical practices, offices of prayer, centering prayer, lectio divina, things that a lot of Protestant churches with rock and roll bands we don't hear a lot about, and it's kind of to our deficit. So yeah, he's a super solid guy, and very insightful.
Good. Well, so the format here is we're gonna go through 7 of his quotes. So this is not every chapter, but many of his chapters, and we're each gonna take a turn reading a quote,
Mhm.
sharing a thought, a comment, ask a question about it, however the Spirit leads. And we'll do that through twice. So there's 7 quotes, and then we'll end. So we'll just kind of see where this conversation takes us. Uh,
Yes.
the first quote I will jump in with is this one. It's from chapter 1, Monasticism and Family Life, and it says this: Carlo Coretto, one of the 20th century's best spiritual writers, spent many years in the Sahara Desert by himself praying. Yet he once confessed that he felt that his mother, who spent nearly 30 years raising children, was much more contemplative than he was and less selfish. If that is true, and Coretto suggests that it is, the conclusion we should draw is not that there was anything wrong with his long hours of solitude in the desert, but that there was something very right about the years his mother lived, an uninterrupted life amid the noise and demands of small children. So I found this quote to be captivating, to be encouraging. You know, so often I think as good Protestant evangelicals, we equate personal holiness with personal devotional time, and that time of solitude, which is important, and I believe in it. But uh, like when you become a parent, whatever whatever like record you had of like your longest streak of like uninterrupted devotional days just gets interrupted,
Mhm.
and then your time throughout the day becomes compressed, and there's just not a lot of space. And for him to say, my mother who raised children for all these years, who didn't do what I did, she was really holy. And I can say that in my own life as I've encountered men and women who have been, you've seen parenting, and there is something really special sometimes about their walk. You're like, wow, God has been growing them in the midst of that spiritual discipline of
Mhm.
raising a child. And so I guess my question for you too is, have you seen this? Is there anyone that comes to your mind
Mhm.
that you think, wow, they really demonstrate kind of what he's getting at?
Yeah, I'll jump in real quick. When I was younger in high school, I wanted to be a nun, and I remember telling my high school boyfriend at the time, I was not Catholic. He was.
It's a good way to
Awkward.
break up.
Well, he was not on board with the plan. But he was like, "You're not even Catholic." And I was like, "That's a detail. I just think the life of a nun, like that seems like the cheat sheet shortcut to get closer with God, right?" And so this idea that like it's really in the everyday of living life with kids, that harried existence, that God meets us in those places. And the person I thought about actually isn't a parent, but it's our son's kindergarten teacher from last year, and really all kindergarten teachers. Like I teach at a K through 12 school, and we always say that the teachers who work with the kindergarten and first grade, like they have a special blessing from the Lord, because it's just that interruption, that small childness being around you for those hours. And I do think you need to have a special calling to work with kindergartners. But I also think that there's probably a shaping on the other side of it too, that as they spend that time in the classroom with that many young kids, like that's part of what turns them into the beautiful people that they are. And so, I hope that that is also happening to us as parents, but I've seen it at least in her. I think of her. Yeah. She's also a mom,
Yeah.
awesome mom, but I know her as a kindergarten teacher.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah. No, and one of my friends in Seattle, he was a stay-at-home dad, and he had two little kids, and I would spend time with him, and we'd be carrying on a conversation, and he kind of danced with the chaos of it, where like his kids are doing all this stuff and they're asking for a question. He's like, hold on one second. And he was very gentle with them. And then he was able to come right. And he just like was able to flow in and out of the conversation. And I mean, horribly, like I was like kind of looking for a closet to put his kids in because I wanted to talk to my buddy, and it was like, and I wonder if part of it is just personalities. Like I don't know. I mean, I feel like some people are able to dance in that a little bit better, and others of us are a little bit more, it needs to be orderly. And I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
It reminds me of in Mere Christianity, Lewis talks about how it's not comparing like the saved person to the unsaved person, but it's rather comparing the saved person to who he would have been were he not saved. And so I
Wow.
think like there's that idea that, in parenting, it doesn't make us all perfect saints, but it certainly brings us closer to God than we would be were it not for that experience, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's really good.
Yeah, I think of just a mom from the church I pastored at who had 6 kids and just had an amazing prayer life.
Mm-hmm.
And her kids were joyful
Mm-hmm.
and they weren't perfect. No kid is. And certainly, um, I'm sure there's growth areas, but I was just constantly encouraged and by her presence and just seeing her and her prayer life,
Mm-hmm.
and then getting to participate in that. We would sometimes meet before the church service. We did for a while, at least before COVID,
Mm-hmm.
to pray. And sometimes it was just the two of us. And I just always felt like the presence of the Lord,
Yeah.
and like I felt like as we were done sometimes with that prayer time, like her face was glowing. I was like, I'm
Yeah.
encountering the Holy Spirit through this person.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think of her. Um,
Yeah. Well, and in my study of the various monastic movements and videos and stuff, I mean, the beauty of it is like a lot of them practice all seven offices of prayer, like which starts at 3 a.m., 6 a.m., 11, I mean, throughout the day. And when the bells are rung, you go get together and you pray. And some of the videos that I've watched specifically are like when Protestants or other people go and visit a monastery and they kind of snap into the rhythm of the monastery, and it's exhausting for them. Like after 2 days, they're completely fried. But for the monastics, it's like you get up at 3 a.m. and you experience the stillness of the night. And I remember when our daughter was born and like, the hours in the middle of the night and you're sitting in a chair, with maybe a soft light on. And we know that feeling. I mean, that is a holy space, right?
yeah.
But you have to get up and engage it to experience it.
Mm.
That- that's great. We're going to get into
I was
more
gonna
of
say
this
that's a
too.
great lead-in. I think
Yeah.
actually that's like the perfect intro. So our next quote here, I'll cite it just like you did there. It's in chapter 2 of the Domestic Monastery, page 22. For those of you that want to go look it up. It says this: any mother or father, while raising children, perhaps in a more privileged way even than a professional contemplative, is forced, almost against the will, to constantly stretch the heart. For years while raising children, her or his time is never her or his own. Personal needs have to be kept in second place, and every time a parent turns around, a hand is reaching out and demanding something. A parent hears the monastic bell many times during the day and has to drop things
Mhm.
mid-sentence and respond, not because they want to, but because it's time for that activity, and time isn't one's own, but God's. And yeah, you mentioning the middle of the night wake ups, we just had that the other night with one of our kids that actually normally sleeps through the night. But that monastic bell was just ringing, and it was like the need to get up and comfort them, but also to get up and quiet them so that they didn't wake up the rest of the house because then there would be even more monastic bells ringing. And and but that's just like it's just like such a lived thing and such a applicable thing. So I definitely resonate with the idea. And I was just thinking about this idea of recognizing that your time is not your own,
Mm.
and how the monastery bells do this intentionally, and like the cry of children does this maybe less intentionally, but gets us to a point of realizing that our time is not our own, right? It's God's. And so I was just kind of wondering if there's been times in your life where having that recognition, like, wow, my time really isn't my own. Like the time that I have, this is God's time. If there's been a time that you particularly felt that or ought to have felt that, I don't know. Challenged to feel that. Like, what's the
Mm.
benefit of the recognition that your time is not your own? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that what comes to my mind is just this whole year. Um, so we live in a wonderful state that has a program that allows
Mm.
for time off. I guess we're in Colorado. I could share that. I told you to share. We're in Colorado, right?
It's out.
Secrets out. And so when you have a child, you get like these 12 months, 12 weeks of paternity or maternity leave, and then you can space it out over the course of a year. And leading up to our youngest birth, we were experiencing a lot of anxiety about childcare.
Hmm.
And then it kind of occurred to me once I got to know this law that like I could provide some of the childcare.
Hmm.
So I've been taking every Tuesday off of work for since this last summer to provide childcare to my newborn. And that's been wonderful. Like it's so precious to spend that time with him. And yet at the same time, it's also stretching because that's perhaps not how I would normally choose to spend my Tuesdays, right? Like I want to get to work. I want to do the thing that makes me feel like a grown up and, that makes me feel like I have value. And yet God has said, no, for this season, on these days, you get to see and spend time with someone who's made in my image and
Wow.
experience his blessing. And that's wonderful. And it's also very challenging. Um, so I think that's kind of
Yeah.
learning to that my time doesn't belong to myself. And I
Hmm.
know it's been a sacrifice for you with your job as
Hmm.
well. And so certainly this newborn year has been one of stretching.
Yeah.
So good. Yeah, it really makes me think about, I mean, I think the whole spiritual formation process is about us dying to ourselves. And I mean, we don't realize young in the early parts of life how egocentric and selfish and narcissistic, like all those things are just kind of baked into us, right? I mean, it's why a child, it's like it's mine, right? It's just like and we actually and God has to purge that from us. So like the part where it says personal needs have to be kept in second place. There's something beautiful in the fact that God gives you something that you created that you love because I probably wouldn't let anything else take my thing away if I does it make sense and God uses them to melt our hearts and to melt that part of us to put someone else first and yeah and I mean that is such a long process and I know too many people who are past the raising their kids stage and it's really sad for me especially when I interact with men who whose life has always been about themselves and their hobby and their cars and it's just like they're I don't know like they're when that dying process didn't actually happen. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
And because there because you miss out on seeing something better. You're like a teenager with money and latitude, which is usually doesn't work very well. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Well, and I think the modern world, makes the problem worse, right? Because it's about control. And
Mhm.
there was a time not that long ago where a lot of stuff in life was out of our control. But now
Mhm.
it's like more and more and more. You can control everything, right? You can
Mhm.
get the thing delivered to your door the next day, whatever it is. And so there are fewer and fewer things that really emphasize our lack of control, and that
Yeah.
having to cater to the needs of someone else is something that you can't control. So,
Yeah. Well, and even kind of back to the spiritual formation process, like for a lot of people, it's dangerous because a lot of people read or they hear about spiritual formation in the standpoint of like my rule of life and
mm,
my fulfillment. But the reality is like Christian faith has always been communal, right? So part of monasteries was the idea of like I couldn't just enter a monastery, or you, Monica, like if you would have gotten your dream and been a nun, right? Like you would have succumbed to their systems and their order, or they'd have kicked you out, like in Sound of Music.
right. How do you solve a problem like Maria? I was just thinking that. Yeah.
Exactly. You're out of here, right? Eh,
Mm,
Yeah, so that purging of something in us that needs to be looked at, and uniquely with our kids, I mean, God softens that blow in a lot of ways, maybe.
mhm, mhm.
It's really
Yeah.
great. Um, James, this is
All
your
right.
quote.
All right. Okay, so this is on page 43, Lessons from the Monastic Cell. That's probably why I liked it.
Mhm.
Um, Go to your cell, and your cell will teach you everything you need to know. Stay inside your vocation, inside your commitments, inside your legitimate conscriptive duties, inside your church, inside your family, and they will teach you where life is found and what love means. Be faithful to your commitments, and what you are ultimately looking for will be found there.
Mhm.
Wow. Um, so what really resonated with me on this is so I'm currently doing a cohort thing at a Denver seminary called Praxis. It's like 25 ministry leaders, and we get together once a month, and we're walking through just this spiritual formation process for us. And one of the unique things when it started was we spent a day looking into like tension. And the reality is like when I think of tension, a lot of times when there's tension in my life, I like to resolve it. Like if Jonathan and I have a problem, I'm going to call him because I want to just have I want to get past it, right? Or if there's something uncomfortable. And part of what they challenged us, and I've been living in, is a lot of times tension. Well, they explained it and said tension can be bad, but sometimes tension builds us like resistance training, right? So like the resistance bands, tension is good for us. It builds muscle. And then they said, and this messed me up, was they said sometimes tension is like a hammock. You can rest in it. And I was like, nope. Right? Because this there's this part of me like I will rest after the tension is resolved. And I think a lot of times in our family, in our church, in our job, in our the mundane parts of life, we try to get past it to get to life. And it's in the midst of that is where we're going to be changed by the tension that we experience.
Yeah, it makes me think of the saying to grow where you're planted, right?
Hmm.
Like wherever you are, like that's be there and do that because that's
Yeah.
that's where you're supposed to be. And I've thought about that
Hmm.
a number of times.
Yeah, I think, looking back on season of the pastorate and then my time of parenting, I think some of the mistakes that I've seen is that in my own life, right, that desire to resolve something quickly,
Hmm.
because And usually it comes down to I can't take the stress. I can't take the not knowing. And I think especially when it comes to kids, like you can't resolve your kids. Right? And when I try to go to that quick solution, the quick resolution, usually it involves raising the voice, or coming to a snap judgment without really
Mhm.
understanding the situation.
Yeah.
My kids feel small, they feel unheard. They let me know about it, which is good. And so, yeah, how can we live inside that tension, live inside that place where God is calling us to be? And you always hear parents say, "Oh, those years were so precious, they passed.
Cherish this time.
Cherish this time." And I'm like, "Yeah, I do, but like, you can stop saying it because it doesn't help me
Yeah.
cherish it."
Yeah.
Um, Right. So I like his way of saying it, right? Like just live inside yourself. This is a cell. Like let's
Hmm.
admit, like this is a cell. It's not super comfortable.
Hmm.
There's not a lot of sunlight coming in. It's a little drafty,
Hmm.
and the mattress is very thin. But live inside your cell as a parent, and that's where I need to be when it comes
Hmm.
to fatherhood.
Yeah. Well, just that idea of fidelity to it, right? To commitment, to be faithful to commitments. What is it? Obedience in the same direction. What's the
Long
quote?
obedience
Long
and saying,
obedience in the same
um,
direction.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, that idea of just,
Eugene
yeah,
Peterson.
being persistent in the thing, instead of always being trying to fix the thing or change the thing, resolve the thing, is just having perseverance in the thing. There's something beautiful and yeah, sanctifying about that.
Well, and you shared that word fidelity, which I mean, what a rock star word, right? It's just because I because I think our culture, the whole we fell out of love and right and the heart wants what the heart wants. Well, I mean that's crap theology, right? And it doesn't build resilient people, and it doesn't and it yeah, I mean it builds destroyed lives because that fidelity and that I'm going to stay in this and I'm going to let it transform me instead of looking for a quick escape. Because I kind of like my praxis experience. It's like a lot of times, like man, the tensions that I'm in, to trust that God is in it and just ask him to give me eyes to see that, instead of just like, God, help me just get through this stage until the kids move out, which, I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
man, there's got to be more than that.
Well, and you can take like that long term, like until the kids are 18, right? But also just in the short form of like just until we get through Christmas break, right? And then like just
Yes.
until we get
Yeah.
to the next break, and then just till we get to summer, just until we get out of summer. And you start to just constantly be living for the next thing instead of living
Yeah.
in the thing. Yeah. Living in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah. See,
Woo.
be seasonal. Live in your season.
This quote is great. Quote number four, I like it because it's about eating. Uh, I also think it's convicting. Prayer
Mm.
is like eating. There needs to be a good rhythm between big banquets, high celebration, high aesthetics, lots of time, proper formality, and the everyday family supper. Simple, no frills, short, predictable. A family that tries to eat every meal as if it were a banquet soon finds that most of its members are looking for an excuse to be absent, with good reason. Everyone needs to eat every day, but nobody has energy for a banquet every day. The same holds true for prayer. And yeah,
Woo.
this is such a great quote, right? Because I think so often, and we have a tendency, I think, as Protestants, to elevate like the Martin Luther, right, who would pray for 3 hours every morning before
Mhm.
starting his day, and that then becomes the standard by which all of us need to judge ourselves. And I just really found this to be helpful to say, like, prayers like eating, you're gonna have some big meals where you spend a lot of time in prayer and you really like get down to it and you pray for each other. Um,
Our
and
monastery bell is ringing.
our monastery bell
Excuse
is
me.
ringing. Oh, that's great. But prayers also, sometimes you do it on the go, right? You eat your meal as I don't know if you should be doing it while you're driving now in the state of Colorado, but right, like at work, or you're kind of, thinking about it as you head out. So yeah, and my dad actually was a really great example of someone who tried to pray and really developed the discipline of prayer, and he put like prayer directories together for their church and really seemed to get after it. So I guess this is just like recognizing that both are necessary. And as someone who feels like I'm frequently praying as a conversation with God, it was encouraging, but then also a good challenge to say, okay, but do you have a balanced diet, right? Like,
Yeah.
is your prayer life always snacks on the go? Because if that's the case, then you're probably missing those longer times of prayer. And so how can you make sure that you have those times of solitude and listening and prayer to get after it? So what do you think of this and practice of prayer, James?
Yeah. So I see it in the context of, I mean, I've seen a lot of parents who try to be very faithful to the spiritual development of their kids, and yeah, they wear their kids out, right? Because faith isn't fun, it isn't spontaneous, and so God's not very fun. I mean, it's kind of the idea of everything we do is, you have to get dressed up certain way to go to church, and when you pray you have to say the right thing, where as a parent, I mean, like I've messed around over the years with my kids where, like, you sit down for Chinese food and it's like, God, I just thank you for China and for those people and for, for their and you kind of see your
Uh,
kids like look at you while you're praying, like, what are you doing? Like, or I mean, I'm a big St. Francis fan. So like, you're outside and if you see like a squirrel and you just like, just start talking like, "Hey, brother squirrel, how are you doing today?" And it's like, and your kids see a playfulness to you of like you're interacting with creation, and instead of it being formal and rigid, because that will solidify in them. And it's kind of that idea of, the scary thing is our kids' view of God is very much shaped by us. And yeah, so if meals are something that you have to get dressed up to like a banquet every time you eat, yeah, people are going to start making up excuses to not be there. But if you have some pizza rolls here and there, it's like, man, they mix it up pretty good.
yeah. No, I love that. And yeah, I mean, thinking back to my own dad, he would certainly he'd pray for us, and I would remember him coming in at night, praying at the foot of our bed and praying for wisdom. He'd always pray like, put a hedge of thorns and a wall of protection around my kids, very like Job-esque, like spiritual
Wow.
protection. But then he would always pray for wisdom, and I remember that just like that rhythm. And I kind of attribute, okay, I think whatever wisdom I have, I think is just the Lord answering my dad's prayers, right? And so like that did make an impact on my life, even though there was a rhythm to it, like kind of this liturgy. Um, but then I also got to watch, like I shared earlier, just kind of see um, the sensitivity he expressed towards people through prayer, and that it wasn't just this, let's get it over with, or this so formal. Like there was this dynamic aspect to it, right? And if
Yeah.
prayer is talking to God, a conversation with God, it should be dynamic and not just the same thing over again. And James talks about that, right? He talks about, just meaningless repetition, right?
Hmm.
That God doesn't want us to just like shout the same things at him over and over again. He wants to to know us and be known by us.
And for our kids to realize God doesn't live in the church. Like God lives in the world where you go. Like one of my favorite parenting memories was like when my son was in farm baseball, which is just above t-ball. So it's like it's I think it was machine pitch or something, and he was up to bat, and he's this little guy, and he had two strikes on him, right? And I saw him kind of he swung at the second one, and I saw him go like this, and it looked like he was pooping his pants, but I knew what he was doing. He was praying, and he
Oh,
was, and sure enough, and I was coaching first base, and he hit a weak ground ball, and he ran to first base, and he got on. But it's
oh,
like, isn't that where faith is formed? Where like there's a lot of people that think, yeah, God is formal, so the real me can't come close to him, and he lives in the church. And it's like, no, man, he follows you everywhere. He is present with you wherever your feet take you.
I love that, like, and helping our kids like recognize when God answers their prayers.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, that is something that I try to do. I work in fundraising, and I told my son like, oh, we're this amount. I think it was like $30,000 away from our goal here at the end of the year. And I told him to pray. I like asked him a couple times, Elijah, would you pray for the fundraiser? And then we got a big check. Um, and I called him and I was like, I wanted him to know, like,
Yeah.
I was like, I'm being such a great dad right now. Like, Elijah, thank God answered your prayers.
Yeah.
Dad, I didn't pray yet. And I was like, well, the Lord like answered the prayer you're gonna pray. And
Yes,
it
exactly.
didn't really sound like he was gonna pray for my
God's the Alpha and Omega.
that's right. The beginning and he provides. But we're
Yeah.
like with little things too, we try to help them see like when God answers those prayers because we need to be reminded and um yeah. One of the practices that I've been doing recently that I've been finding to be helpful is just like keeping a prayer journal.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you've ever done that, but I was finding that I'd like tell people like, oh yeah, I'll pray for you. And I would then, but then I just kind of like forget. And I was like, okay, I need like a little one that I can carry around, although I haven't done a very good job of carrying it. It's still by my bed, but I've been updating it and like praying
Yeah.
through it and but I've been noticing like I've been able to like check things off to be like, okay, that prayer got answered. That prayer got answered. Um, and so that's something that's been helping me kind of get back into prayer a little bit because I was sensing some dryness in my own life and this has been good. What are some of the practices in your own life in prayer that you found to be helpful?
Yeah, I mean, I'm I mix up my spiritual rhythms a fair bit, and part of it is like I'm pretty good at becoming like I'm a pretty disciplined person, and so I can actually do something faithfully, and then it's like if I miss a day, I feel guilty. So I purposely like do something and then I break out of it. So like for me, like I'll journal my prayers and then I'll just stop and I'll start using my journal in a different way. Does it make sense?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And one of the big lessons that I've learned and I've interacted with our kids about is like to be specific in your prayers. I mean it's been funny over the years how we've prayed like when we were in Tennessee and our house was a tiny little 1,300 square foot, 55-year-old house and 1,300 square feet. And we were praying and like, God, if we could have a bigger house in Seattle, that would be great. And we told our kids like, the house we had in Seattle was 1,400 square feet. And I told the kids about it, like, isn't that funny? Like, God was faithful, but he kind of messed with us, right? It was like, you got a bigger house. It's like 100 square feet, really?
Be more specific next time in your prayer.
Seriously.
Uh, that's great.
Yeah. So I mean, the big rhythm in my life right now, like there's the liturgy of the hours, the offices of prayer, which a lot of monasteries use, and it's built on like in the Psalms, it talks about the 7 times during the day to pray. Most people practice the offices of prayer 3 times a day, like morning, afternoon, and then when you go to bed at night. And I'm pretty faithful to that. I mean, I have a book of kind of written just scriptures basically, and I read scripture and then I use it as a springboard to just like start a conversation with God in the morning. Um, in the midday, I usually go for a walk or I just pray and just kind of acknowledge God's presence in the middle of the day, kind of find myself in the midst of it. And then at the end of the day, my wife will go up and take a shower, and I'll have the living room to myself, and I'll do my end of the day kind of office of prayer. And I really like that, like punctuating it, just because I think the tradition of like have a quiet time. It's a good discipline. The problem that I have with it is a lot of people they open the Bible in the morning and then they say amen and then they go. And it's kind of like taking one big breath of air and then you just go try to do it. And I like the idea of how can I commune with God throughout the day?
Mm. I like that too, because yeah, I can be a bit legalistic about practices as well, and I would find that I'd be like it would be that checkbox, right? It'd be like, oh, good,
Yeah.
I got it done. Now I can know that I am holy saint as I go about the rest of my day for myself.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
So I like the idea of the daily, morning, noon, and night. I think that's right. Like that idea of trying to be intentional about walking with God through the day, um, you know, and being a friend of God in that way. I like that.
Yeah. Well, and that Praxis experience that I'm going through, one of the sayings they use is provide space for your soul to catch up to your body.
Mm,
And I really like that because because there's that thing where your brain and your body is kind of here, but your soul is like it's just trying to catch up to you, and it's like, and that's where for me silence and solitude. I mean, a lot of times my prayer time is just um, be still and know that I'm God,
mm,
or come, Lord Jesus. I don't need to tell him anything else. I mean, it's kind of like you and Monica can sit in the backyard on a sunny day and just enjoy time together.
mm,
And for me, like I'm finally leaning into like wanting that with God. Like, I don't
mm.
need to tell you what to do because may your will be done. But can I just be with you for a half hour? And and
Yeah.
I'm just understanding this.
Mm. Well, hopefully I'll get there too. So let's jump to number six.
Okay.
Your quote
Yeah.
from Henry Nouwen.
All right. So this quote is from chapter 8 of Spirituality and Seasons of Our Lives. And it says this: As Henry Nouwen used to say, at a certain point in our lives, the question is no longer, what can I still do that my life makes a contribution? But how can I now live so that when I die, my death will be an optimal blessing to my family, the church, and the world? We are not so much struggling with how to give our lives away, but with how to give our death away. Our questions now become, how do we live the last years of my life so that when I die, my death will bless my loved ones, just as my life once did? How do I live out my remaining years so that when I die, blood and water will metaphorically flow from my dead body as they once flowed from Jesus's dead body? Wow.
It is that's a real intense quote. So
I am like and it's so humbling, right? Because it really is the idea of how do we die to self so that the life of Christ can actually come and flow out of us.
Mm.
Um, so what resonated with me when I read this, it reminded me of something like an experience that I had when my daughter was born. And I've told the story to many people, like at men's
Mm.
retreats and stuff, and it's never landed. Like people like my story stressed them out, but I'm going to try it one more time. Um, so so here we go. Um, so so when our daughter was born and I got to hold her for the first time, and brand new babies, like you can hold them in just like this in your hand. And I was looking at her face and her cute little lips and her little button nose, and the thought came to my mind, um, if this whole thing goes the way it's supposed to, this person is going to be standing over my grave.
Mm.
And I had this holy moment of awareness that it wasn't morbid. And most people I've told this story to, like, they're like, that's really dark. And I'm like, but it wasn't dark. It was like, it gave me purpose and excitement.
Mm.
Does it make sense? Because obviously, I mean, our goal would be that we would die and our kids would live decades after us joyfully and flourishing, right?
Mm.
And it gave me this moment of like, okay, um, it's it's like you're decreasing and you're gonna pour your life and your energy into this person increasing to where you're helping her move forward. And that I mean, that was such a gift for me in that moment because something clicked in my heart.
Mm.
And and it was interesting because I mean, like I quit fly fishing, I quit doing a lot of hobbies and stuff that I had because like I wasn't going to go off to the mountains for 8 hours on a Saturday with my buddies. I was going to be wherever this little person needed me to be. And I was going, and I was so thankful that I got that gift of that awareness because I've again I've known a lot of men that that they still play golf once or twice a week or they fish on the week, and it's like, and their wife is kind of raising the kids and they're kind of bouncing in and out, and it's like, I think that thing of dying to ourselves, so that we can give our life away. The other big thing for me, I mean, I'm 55 now, so I'm getting up there. We talked earlier about the older I get, and I'm gonna start walking around the church in a robe, like a monk's robe or a bathrobe. I haven't decided yet, but there's something about growing older with
Mhm.
dignity and with joy and not becoming like a jaded old person,
Mm.
and just kind of, and I yeah and I'm eager to model something to my kids, and especially at that moment of death where it's just like it's not a interruption but it's actually something that I've been anticipating, and to model faith and to model lack of fear. That's heavy stuff, dude, but that's where it went for me.
No, that's beautiful. I think it's interesting that right, when I read this quote, I kind of immediately went to like end of life thinking, right?
Yeah.
You went to beginning of life thinking, right? You
Mm.
went to the birth of your daughter, and it has caused you to not just think about how I can end well, but well, or it has, but it's like you recognize it kind of goes back to your quote from earlier, the cell, right? Like how like I end well today, right?
Hmm.
Like today, how I live impacts that future time, right? Because we know of people who like their kids don't even go to their funeral, or
Yeah.
they didn't see them. They like dump them in a nursing home, and they're done with them, and lots of reasons for those things. But like what you're seeking to do is build that relationship now, um, so that you know. there's significance there when you do go to be with the Lord, right? We so to catch you up, we skipped your quote. We're
Great.
talking about James's death now.
Oh, goodness.
And we'll go
Okay.
back to your quote here
Sure.
in a minute. We did talk about prayer for a while, but so I have been thinking about like end of life planning because I work in fundraising, and one of our things that I did a lot of research into this year and promoted was legacy giving.
Yeah.
Right? This idea of like when you're gonna pass, you have an opportunity, whether it's your life insurance policy or your will and your trust, to like leave a gift to an organization. Um, and for most people, when they give an end of life gift, it's the largest gift they ever give.
Yeah.
So I think the average is $44,000 that people leave to charities when they die, and most people can't give $44,000 to a charity. And I found that just to be so striking, right? That like how we die can bring life
Yeah.
to others. It makes me think of Jesus, the death, this resurrection, that his death brings us life. And I actually wrote a poem. I was trying to look it up here. Yeah, that's what it is. It says, "From dust you came, and to dust you shall return, but some dust enriches the soil." Right, and that idea that like
Wow.
when we die, right, like there's an
Mhm.
opportunity to enrich the soil and bring new life. And that just kind of came out of all this reflecting on people passing and the opportunity that we each have to think about that last stage and to die well.
Mm.
Money. I mean, that's good. Well, and it makes me think more about, yeah, I mean, like you're a point that it's interesting that I thought about when my daughter was born, and you went right to the end of stage, but it makes me think like at the stage I am right now at my age, and my kids are, 20 and 23, like in some ways my dying well is me being honest about my struggles. Because the older your kids get, they see my struggles. Like they know it's kind of annoying because like my son, like he was here for Christmas and we were doing something and my wife and I got in a little bit of a tiff and she walked out of the room and we're cooking and he looks up at me and he's like, that was your fault. And I was like, shut up. And then I was like, but then I had a chance, like, so what did you see? And it was like, no, you're right. Thank you for that, But like, but sometimes dying is like, like, yeah, I mean, and all of us with our parents, it's like we know their faults, but when somebody can own it and just be like, yeah, I'm a work in progress. I was hoping I'd have this licked by this age, but I don't, you know?
Yeah.
And there's something about modeling. I mean, humility is a form of death, right? And there's something about the beauty of that, of showing our kids that yeah, it's okay to die to our pride in those little ways. Like, yeah, that's true. That was my fault, you know?
Mhm.
Yeah, be a living sacrifice. What do you think, babe? Like, jump in on this quote.
I remember this part of the book. He kind of talks about, aging in different life stages, and made me think of a human development class I took actually, in the Ericksons, and they're big on the different life stages that people go through, and how there's the generative stage, how when you start to give back, right? Like you realize that you have something that you want to share with the next generation, and then um, the husband, Eric Erickson, as he was like nearing death, he and his wife kind of formulated this last stage where you kind of go back through the stages all together. They weren't coming from like a faith perspective, but I just think that that recognition that something happens at the end of life that is just common to all, like humans have to wrestle with death. Like that's
Mhm.
something that we all have to deal with, and thinking about how to do that and how to do that well, and the idea that there is a good way to engage that process, and that as Christians we have a good suggestion as to what that might look like. Yeah, I'll trade you.
My turn. I'll be back.
But that idea that this is something that is common to humanity, and God gives us a clue in His Word as to what it might look like to wrestle with that, I think is really cool.
That's so cool. Yeah. And so a model that like my a hero I mentioned earlier is Saint Francis of Assisi. And
Mm,
like his quote when he was dying, all the brothers were gathered around him and they took his tunic off him, so he laid there naked.
mm,
And for him it was like, I came into the world with nothing and I left with nothing. I win.
mm,
Right? So
mm,
and his last words were, I did that which was mine to do. May the Lord show you what is yours to do.
mm.
So he didn't even leave them a burden of like, there's my score, go beat it. It was like, nope, you do what the Lord has called you to do, and you got to witness me as a spiritual father finish well.
Yeah, that's
And at the,
beautiful.
yeah, right?
Beautiful. Well, and a woman I used to work with at a nonprofit, who worked with older adults, she lovingly and jokingly referred to herself as a doula of death, because she
Mhm.
just was so used to working with that population. And so she would just encounter people who would die a lot. And she just became, it was a gifting of hers, actually. And she was actually very into the monastics, and she was kind of a charismatic Catholic herself. But she would have people who she would know where if a loved one was like nearing the end, they would call her in and she would go and like be with them in those moments. And that was just her gift to, yeah, to that person. And so I love that picture of him. It's not something you do alone, right? It's something you do in community, and that
Mhm.
there's this
Mhm.
opportunity to be a blessing on both sides of that. I think is something that we don't think about because we don't like to think about it, but it can be really beautiful.
Well, and that picture, the older you get when you have more loved ones that have passed on, and this idea of the communion of the saints, right? When like
Mhm.
and like a day is coming when we're at this feast, and my dad is on one side, and Francis and C.S. Lewis, and we all raise a glass to our host,
Mhm.
And how cool is that, And for us of faith to realize, man, that banquet is coming,
Mhm.
and how awesome, to be able to, yeah. Mary, tell me about carrying Jesus,
Right.
it's like, right, it's like, oh my gosh.
Yeah. Yeah, which is actually, I think, a great segue into the quote that I guess you guys skipped, and I can see if I can
Yep.
figure out how to go back. Here we go. Yep. Okay, so this is from chapter 7, page 71. Being a mother or a father stretches the heart just as the womb is stretched in pregnancy. This is because among all loves, parental love is perhaps the one that most pulls your heart out of its self-love. Parenting reshapes the core of your being to help you love more like God loves. Seeing your own child's fragility and morality works to create in you feelings of inexpressible tenderness that help you feel what God must feel when God looks at us. To be a parent is to be formed in a school of love.
Wow.
Um, yeah, I think that's a great picture. And just this idea of parenting and, especially, yes, like as a mom, being pregnant and that whole experience is incredibly sanctifying. It's necessary fasting against your will from a lot of things, but I think it shapes you. But then just for all parents, right? Whether you're a biological parent or an adoptive parent, just like anybody who's in that caretaking role of another person. It's like the Les Mis line, to love another person is to see the face of God, right? Like just that
Yeah.
of love helps you understand God's love for us more. So, yeah, I mean, do you have any thoughts on fragility or tenderness or God's love for us?
Yeah, I mean, like it's interesting this Advent season. I spent a lot of time with Mary and just
Mm,
kind of just trying, I mean, that reoccurring thing of she pondered it in her heart or she treasured it in her heart. And man, it was just like the things that were said to her, and even like thinking about, the angel came and she had no idea if this was gonna look human,
Right.
right? Like this
That's a
could
good
this
point.
could this could get very embarrassing if it has
Hmm.
wings, or like who knows, right?
Yeah.
And and then she goes to the temple, and like, the Simeon and Anna, the prophetess,
Mhm.
they say weird stuff, and she treasures it in her heart. And then, for her to kind of think her son went crazy at a certain point, and then to see him crucified. And I don't know if I read it or if it was just a thought I had as I was meditating on her through Christmas, but it's interesting. None of the Gospels have an account of Jesus speaking to Mary after the resurrection,
Hmm.
but it had to have happened.
Hmm.
And can you imagine all that she treasured and all that she did? And Jesus is there. And like, what did he say to her? It's like, we did it. And you, mom, like, a spear pierced your soul.
Hmm.
I mean, it's just like, oh my gosh, it's like that is a glass of wine that I want to have in heaven with Mary, right? And like,
Wow.
and but I think that's part of the parenting process of like, when our kid struggles, whether it's a speech impediment or a bully or cognitive, like just their development, and how your heart just aches for them, and you would give anything to take this away, right? Or heartbreak. And it just like, gosh, I mean, it just, yeah, like, let me take it, God. But it does stretch our heart in such a unique way.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh,
Thinking of heart stretching.
I wondered earlier if I should just bring him in. He's
It's only appropriate, right?
That's awesome.
He
The
is
monastery
great.
bells. I love that.
Are we gonna keep him in the?
Let's just finish it out with him. He's very awake.
He's so awake.
Bells have rung.
Well, I was actually, I was thinking of him. So I had a day back at school today, and I've been home for 3 weeks for Christmas break. And so he's just been like next to me for all 3 weeks. And this was the first day that he had a babysitter again and had to be, away from me for a couple of hours. And he just had the hardest time. And normally he does really well with we have great childcare.
I came home from
Yeah, but
work.
Jonathan actually left work early to come home because he was just having such a grumpy day. But I was just thinking about that and the fact that like he's been so close to me, and then to be separated from me was really challenging. And I think that can be a picture of our relationship with God, right? As God is our ultimate parent and God who loves us, and that we are built and made to be that close to him. And when we're away from him, like it is wrong, And yet I think so many of us get used to that. And we just get used to that dissatisfaction, and we get used to that emptiness, and we get used to that separation. And yet there's clearly like we're meant to be close to our
Yeah.
Heavenly Father. We're meant to have that closeness. And so just I think this idea of yeah, God's loving us in that way and caring for us. It boggles the mind, really, to think about how much you were saying Mary loved Jesus, how much we love our kids, and think that's the love the Father has for us, and that's the intimacy and closeness that we're meant to have with him. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
And how in silence and solitude, I mean, I think of our culture, and we always have music or a podcast or something on, and it's just like, and I think God's heart is like, just come sit with me, like, come,
Mm.
let's walk together in the cool of the garden. And I mean, there's that jealousy that I had with my wife, like when our kids were little, and like mom was the only one that could comfort them, right? And like, I I don't know about you, but like the first couple years of the kids' lives, it was like I felt rather unnecessary. Because I didn't have a lot the connection and I didn't have the equipment and like everything that they wanted, like I could hold them and I could, but there was a unique difference there.
Mm.
And it's a beautiful difference. And it's, yeah, but that God somehow wants to bring us to that place.
Yeah, and the fact that obviously God is our Heavenly Father and He gives us the language to use for that, but there are also these pictures of God as kind of this mothering figure, right? Where Jesus is God, I wish to gather you under my wings, and there's all sorts of imagery in the Old Testament where God uses that kind of language, that specific closeness language. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean, this reminds me of something, I think it was the second quote where it talked about parents putting themselves second.
Hmm.
And, it's only a good conversation if we get slightly heretical. God putting himself second, right?
Mhm.
So that he could put us first.
Hmm.
Uh, and, that he laid down his life
That's right.
because of his tenderness towards humanity, towards men and women, his lost children, so that he could restore them to his family. And I, so this is just a picture of the gospel to me and what God does for us. And then we get to, I think when we experience some of that, it can be a little bit of an act of worship, right? That we're experiencing towards our children, how God experiences emotions towards us. And I think that can be really sweet.
Hmm.
Yeah. If like us just reading the account is just a one-dimensional black and white picture, right? Like the story of the prodigal son, where it's like when you think of your child, like, hey, give me what's mine and good riddance, and it's like, gosh, what would that feel like? Or and then when you see your child come back, and you hear stories about kids that go their own way and shipwreck their life, and then they come back, and it's just like, and like what redemption looks like. And it's like the fact that God lets us experience that, the breaking of that heart and that reunion through being parents. I mean, it's a wild ride.
So I work in addiction recovery, and I see both. I like some of the people that will come and get tours are parents who have children who are maybe have passed because of addiction or are still experiencing it, and you get like, it just breaks their hearts, and you see that. But then I do have the joy of, like, if we're going back to the story of the prodigal son, like the place where I work is like that moment when they decide they don't want to be in the pig pen anymore.
Yeah.
And it's like they need someone to restore them in that far country so that they can go home.
Yeah.
Some of the exercises our young men especially have done is like getting reconciled with family members, parents. Um, so yeah, it's interesting to see that journey.
Can I just throw one more thought out there, and then I'm gonna take him back to the
Yeah,
crib and see if
yeah.
I can get him to go back to sleep, because it is past his bedtime.
Dad brings him in, mom puts him back.
No comment. So thinking through the book and kind of thinking through this conversation, I was reminded of Brother Lawrence, another kind of a monastic voice, and his talking about being in the kitchen and
Yeah.
how when you're with God and you bring everything to God, then even the time in the kitchen can be a time of worship and reconnection. And I think that was one of my kind of takeaways from the book. Not that this is a how-to guide on parenting, like I said at the beginning, but something I've been thinking about in my own parenting is like the way that it works for parenting to really sanctify you and be an act of worship is when you're intentionally recognizing that God is doing it, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people are parents and are not particularly sanctified by it, and it's not an act of worship or not an act of celebration. And so that's my challenge. That's my conviction going forward from here is like, how do I take this and recognize, wow, this is God at work. And there's something beautiful here, and God is shaping me in the midst of this, and being grateful and all of that. So that's my
Your final
that's
word.
my final word. And thank you
That,
so much, James, for talking with us.
thank you. Good night.
Hi, buddy. This comes from chapter 9, The Sacredness of Time. During all the most active years of our lives, we are reminded daily, sometimes hourly, that time is not our own. We are monks practicing a demanding asceticism. There will not always be time to smell the flowers, and we are not always poor for that fact. Most important of all, recognizing in our duties and pressures the sound of the monastic bell actually helps us to smell the flowers, to give to each instant of our lives the time it deserves, and not necessarily the time I feel like giving it.
Hmm.
I think this is such a powerful way to kind of land the plane here to end because yeah, I think you can get this sense as a parent that you're just not experiencing life to its fullness, its fullest because of the busyness that you have to do, the things you have to get done. And yet, if we're willing to like stop and pay attention to the bell, we can actually experience more of life and have more life more abundantly than if we just had everything our own way. That's so
Yeah.
hard. That is such a
Yeah.
paradox that I don't think I get yet, but I like it. I like the concept. Um,
Yeah. Well, and it really helps you see that every moment is holy,
mm,
right? Like there's something sacred in the midst of all of it. And in my experience with littles, so we just converted all of our old videotapes and stuff to DVD, and so over Christmas break we watched about half of them, and it was
yeah.
so funny because like a Christmas morning, like when our kids were little, and you guys like when little kids open presents, they tear little pieces. They don't do it one big piece. They tear like because they have little fingers, right? And they can't and they don't understand where the seams are. So I remember like Christmas morning, the joke was always like dad gets a big trash bag, right? Because
Mhm.
there's millions of little pieces all over, and it drove me nuts. But we were watching the video and uh, and it was interesting just watching it and laughing as a family because like my son, there's a whole tree of stuff and he gets one present and he's like he wants you to open it right then. It's like, well, let's keep opening presents, but he wants to play with it. And then, and his sister does something, and then the reoccurring phrase was, Aiden, there's no biting at Christmas. because
Uh,
because when he was getting frustrated, he would try to bite his sister. But those are holy moments. And like I needed to rewatch the tape to see it.
mm,
Because in the moment, I mean to be fully present really is kind of like like that spiritual and emotional awareness of like I'm here and this is really good. But oftentimes, it's like yeah, it's watching the rerun of the tape where you're like, man, that was glorious. Like that 20 minutes opening those presents and Aiden trying to bite his sister 4 times.
uh, yeah. No, we do something similar where we are making those family videos and they're private on YouTube, but we actually pull them up as a family anytime. And we were watching last Christmas while we
So
were
good.
this Christmas morning. It was like a double Christmas, right? But I don't think I thought about it as a opportunity to reflect on um, you know those moments and praise God for those moments, right? Like pausing and to reflect. And it's so difficult. It ties into your recent sermon, right? Of like, how do you be present in the moment? And often it means like putting down the cell phone. Uh,
Yeah.
but I think God can use even our broken moments of like trying to record everything. Like you said, later, we might be able to pause and reflect. So, um, yeah.
And just realizing that, I mean, there's something like the older I get, like whether it's a beautiful vista when I'm hiking or with family, um, where it's beautiful, but it's bittersweet. Like I get frustrated now, like if I'm hiking and I see something beautiful and I'll pull my phone out to take a picture, and I look at the picture, I'm like, that's not it, because I can't capture it. Does it make sense? Because how this feels, or the full cinematic feet and the chill of the mountains, like I can't get that in a picture. And there's something about it. I forget what the poem is. All things gold will, whatever it is, but the idea that those moments that we have, they're fleeting. I
Mm.
mean, it's kind of like, I mean, it's like a snowflake, but in the moment, to recognize it as best you can, and to take, like, I started calling it mental snapshots, because I can't take a picture of it, but I can close my eyes, and I can I can make a mental snapshot of how this moment feels, and I can revisit that.
One of my coworkers has like smart glasses that can like actually take a photo. And
Yeah.
you'll see him, he'll be like, Alexa, take a photo. And he's just like staring at you.
No.
Uh, so maybe there's something to that, right? Of like, how can we be so present that we're taking a holy snapshot in this moment,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
to see what God is doing and to listen. So, well, this has been great. Highly recommend the book. Thank you for sharing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, my strongest encouragement is, yeah, I mean, I think it's easy for us to think of spiritual time and space and separate it from the other aspects of our life. And yeah, I mean, God uses marriage, and he uses raising kids, and he uses work struggles, and he uses health struggles. And a lot of us just don't have eyes to see that. We think that God's in the mountaintops and all those things, and the joys and struggles of raising kids is a beautiful environment for that to happen.
Hmm. Yeah, that's something the Lord's been teaching me or helping me think about. Who knows if I've learned it. But this idea that like, yeah, life isn't an achievement, right? It's not, you don't experience life when you finally accomplish that thing or finally go on that vacation or your kids finally pick up their dishes at dinner time. Um, like the journey is the destination, right? Like, it's as you go that we get to experience God's grace. God's grace isn't at some far off location. It'll be there when we get there, but who knows when we'll get there. Um, so thank you for sharing this book.
Well, thank you for inviting me, buddy.
Yeah, and for those that watch this, thanks for sticking around to the end. Please like the video, subscribe, share it with a friend. That helps other people find the channel and find this book because I think many other parents could be blessed by it. I would never have encountered this book otherwise. So really appreciate it.